And the person responsible for this whole Dundullimal homestead is a fellow called John Morn, who was an Englishman and came out here in the 1830s, and he returned to England, and but on his way back again he spent some considerable time in India, and he made a lot of money there. And when he arrived in the colony, he had something like £9,000 in those days, so that was late 1830s.
A lot of money.
So he set about, he took over this property from two brothers called Charles and Dalmahoy Campbell, and so he started to develop it. And as you can see, what we have here, what you're looking at now is a central section. The two wings have gone. This was a bedroom wing, which went in a fire in 1901. And this was the kitchen wing, which went in the floods of 1955. When the dam came, so he was a very sophisticated gentleman, and he converted this property from a basic sort of four-room construction, squatter's dwelling. And the National Trust acquired the property in 1985, and then it took 3 solid years for it to be restored. And it was only through a grant from the National Trust, around about the bicentennial year, that this became possible. So things took off with him at that point in time. So in 1988 we opened, and we've been going ever since with a slab dwelling. And we're very lucky to...
One of the few remaining around,
One of the few remaining around, yes. And in order to explain that, I can explain to you. Unsawn timber logs, which are locked into what we call a channel plate, which you can actually see on the ground.
Okay, it's a channel plate on the bottom.
Channel plate on the bottom, yep. And then similarly, it's locked into the rods across the top too. So that's really the basic. So it's, according to the National Trust, it's the most sophisticated timber slab dwelling of its kind in the country. Sophisticated slab dwelling. We have things like 12-paned glass windows. We have cedar French doors and windows. We have a bell pull system which indicates that there were servants here. Interior plastered walls, a very significant dwelling.
So I imagine it's lath plaster.
Lath and plaster, yes. So as I say, it took 3 good years for it to be able to be opened. No one really knew the significance of the property at all. So it had been left to rack and ruin, and it had been used as an animal shelter and had been vandalised, and all those sorts of horrible things had happened to it over the course of years. And fortunately, one of the National Trust people from Sydney, Clive Lucas, he came out this way and realised that this property had great significance. And so, so we go from there. We have
So it's a shingle roof?
A shingle roof, yes. Done with the foam wall. The timber was all cut and felled on the property, and there was a pit saw just out here, so it was all local timber and that sort of thing. The galvanised iron on the roof, it is the original galvanised iron which came out.
So the galvanised iron is the...
It's the original galvanised iron, and that actually came out from England, and you can actually see too, it's the same on the stable roof there too. And of course, as you can see, they are sandstone, which was quarried locally in town, and you've probably looked and seen horse stables and things. So, so John Lorne, he was a very sophisticated gentleman, and it was the beginning of the squatting period, actually, as such as we know it, because in 1836 Governor Burke introduced what we called a licensing fee, and anyone that could so afford that money which was £10 per annum, was able to go beyond the limits of settlement. Up till that time, land had been contained into what we call limits of settlement. But so anyone that could so afford that £10 could go beyond those limits, and hence the squatting period began here.
Right.
Well, on the outside here we have what we call the strangers' rooms. There are 2 strangers' rooms, and they were designed specifically for that purpose. So hospitality would be offered to a traveller. It could be the clergyman, it could be the doctor, it could be anybody really. So these rooms are on the outside of the house, and so they would be offered a bed, probably a meal in the kitchen, and then they would move on the next day without having to, disturb the family as such.
That's nice, yeah.
So that was a nice way. French doors, which were very unusual for that period of time as well. Has been left in its original state, so we can actually, you can see very clearly the construction. You can see the unsawn timber logs locked into the horizontal channel plate, and over which we've got the lath and plaster. So it's very important that we've got this original room as it is. The fact that it was built with cypress pine, and there are no foundations, but the white ants and termites don't attack the
Very lucky.
the cypress. Yes, so that was very fortunate.
The floor's actually sitting on the ground.
So, which makes it sort of planks. So you can see the size of the trees and that were felled in order to do that. Rustic look with the just the whitewashed ceiling, and yet it features like the cedar French doors, and it doesn't pretend to have sort of grand furnishings and things like that, but it's as life was in the 1840s, 1850s.
Oh yeah.
So it's quite different.
So I should imagine.
Original fireplace. This is an original bed head, hand painted flowers sort of down the post there and things. Another interesting piece of furniture here is what we call the, when you finish, ease of travel, and so you've got the brass corners which just go in, and the handles which just slide down too. Yeah. So that was one of the original pieces that was found in the stables too. So that was quite a significant find. Particularly when you consider that the glass came up from England as ballast on ships, and then over the mountains, and so forth. So, and of course, as you
the louvered
section at the top of the French doors is a very simple form of air conditioning. What used to happen was that they would get buckets of water from the river. The Macquarie River is just in front. So the buckets of water would come up and be sloshed over the cobblestones, and as the breeze comes up, it would ventilate through the louvered section.
Very effective.
Very effective, yes, very simple, but very effective. Of course, in the 1850s, it was a significant time. It was the period of the gold rush in this country, and anyone that could afford to have wallpapered walls was obviously...
To have 13 layers of wallpaper, I mean, that's a...
Yes, that's what it actually is. What John Lorne did, actually, too, was he pushed this bedroom back, inserted the hallways, and you can see the floorboards go a different direction. And so, as a result, we've got this lovely wide, the charming sitting room, which is a lovely, gracious room.
Oh, look at that ceiling.
Yes, well, that is what we call a plastered tent ceiling. When he was extending this room, this room was finished, if you roof line out there, that was where this room finished. Yeah. However, in the 1850s, John Moore decided to extend this room and that was when this is what we call a plastered tent ceiling when that was installed.
It's beautiful. I've seen that before.
So now the wallpaper is very significant too. What you're looking at on the wall will actually, when you turn to your Perspex panel, is one of the original pieces of wallpaper, and on the wall what you are looking at is the identical wallpaper. So during restoration, just amazingly, they were able to find that the blocks were available somewhere in Melbourne, and so they were able to have it reproduced, which is we have two bell pulls, one in the sitting room here and one in the dining room, and I'll show you where they originate and things. It works sometimes. You can also do the bells, have to do there too. This hasn't been here all the time. We've only had this for probably about the last nearly 10 years now. It's one of only 8 broadwood pianos that came out from England, and it's a very significant, beautiful old piece of furniture actually. It actually lived in a property, in a station property, somewhere north of Moree, we understand. The people sold, then it somehow or other ended up near Tamworth, I think, somewhere. And then the owners donated it to the National Trust, and because it fitted into the period of time here, the 1840s, it's come to live in Dundullimal. But one of the Palmers. Now, the Palmer family were significant owners of this property at the time of the transfer to the National Trust. So that came from the, just to show you what state they were in. And they used, as far as possible, the same paint, which I think they call it a Brunswick blue, and that's as near as yeah. So it's
the old butler's pantry.
Butler's pantry, and when I tell you that it was a 12-week round trip from Dundullimal to Sydney and back in order to acquire provisions. And this is the dining room, which is a lovely big room again. We have another bell pull there. John Warne married Afrasia.
John Moore married.
John Moore married Afrasia chemist in the early 1850s, and she was a widow, and she had 7 children. Anyway, only one. The end of the 1850s, and then at the end of the 1850s, early 60s, John Moore sold the property to Mr. Cornish and Mr. Brocklehurst, and then descendants, and then the Baird family came out from Scotland in the 1880s, and it was descendants of that family who were the owners of the property at the time of the transfer to the trust. So it's had continuity of 10 years. They're designed for coolness, and the arms swing out like that, and the gentlemen recline, and probably under the bell pull.
With a gin and tonic.
Gin and tonic or a beer in those days, so they basically predominantly made with the cane, and then they went back to Sydney to live and lived at Darling Point, and did you see where the origins of the bell pull begin?
Right, yeah.
So there's just that little bell there, and it goes through that copper wire, through those hooks, and then into the dining room and into the sitting room. So a very unsophisticated one, but very effective design for coolness. I mean, this is today is not as hot as stinking as yesterday was, but it is, the low verandas do keep out the glare, and
Start running the northern side.
This northern side of the house is slightly lower than the southern side. That's a quirk of fate, I think, but anyway, it certainly is. So we're always telling people to be aware of their heads as they go through. Railway Bridge, that's the Macquarie River. And in the flood of we had a second really big flood in 1990, and the water came up to the level of the gates. The kitchen, we know the kitchen was on that side because of the well. However, subsequent families in due course decided that they wanted the kitchen on the western side.
To order a ham. I said, can I just come and buy this? Because I know Peter Davis, I think, used to buy his meats.
Cobblestone.
So, which you would.
Wing that
Yeah.
was destroyed in the
Yes.
1955 floods.
1955 floods. There had been talk of restoration at one point, but it would be. There's the outside.